The Israeli military announced dual U.S.-Israeli citizen Itay Chen was killed during the October 7th Hamas terror attack and that his remains were taken into Gaza. Chen was one of 6 U.S. citizens thought to have been held alive in Gaza, and our thoughts and prayers are with his family. All right, for more, let's bring in Simone Leiden, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Simone, good to be with you. We are now, as we said, 5 months into this war between Israel and Hamas, and it really seems like there's no end in sight anytime soon. How long do you think this conflict could go on?
Well, I think the sooner that the Biden administration provides Israel what it needs to win and stops pressuring them for these pauses, I think the sooner that this conflict will end. At the outset, the Israeli government outlined their 3 goals for this war. And very slowly, the Biden administration has been rolling back its support for those 3 goals, which are the destruction of Hamas, the hostages return, and Gaza no longer being a place from which attacks against Israel could take place.
Yeah, and Simone, we've heard, a lot recently about red lines. President Biden said that Israel's military operation Rafah, well, that would be a red line. And then, of course, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said his forces will go into Rafah and that his red line was October 7th. And he wants to prevent that from ever happening again. And both leaders are obviously at odds with their red lines. That said, do you think an Israeli military operation in Rafah, do you think that could cause a shift in U.S. policy?
It would be difficult to imagine a clear break of U.S. policy. So I think this talk of red lines from the part of President Biden and members of his administration is mostly geared toward a domestic political audience, given that it's an election year. I think it's clear that Israel is going into Rafah. There's a 90% domestic approval rating within Israel to destroy Hamas. So they're not going to stop. They are going into Rafah. And I don't think that the Biden administration is serious about that being a red line in terms of the United States support for Israel or its continuation of any type of support, really.
Simone, I want to talk about this, about Ramadan. How much of a factor is that in the current state of the war? I mean, does it impact Israel's approach to this at all?
Ramadan is an important factor. I think it's important to look at the statements made by the leaders of Hamas with respect to Ramadan, where they've said that they are going to be increasing violence during this period. And so I think that is a very clear signal to Israel and to us that we should expect actually increase in violence during this period.
We're almost out of time, but I do want to bring this up. We mentioned the man who was dead, Mr. Chen. Any other information about any hostages that are being currently held by Hamas? Do we have any updates there?
As you mentioned, there were 6 Americans believed to be held hostage still in Gaza. Unfortunately, with the reported murder of Itay, that's down to 5. But, the Hamas is using these hostages, obviously, as a political tool. And they're using it to continually torture the Israeli public, Jews worldwide who are distraught by this situation. And also the United States, they're holding American hostages, they're holding other foreign hostages. And so it's another tool in their toolkit that they're using in this reign of terror, and it must be stopped, and Israel must be supported in its invasion and in its operation in Rafah to end the conflict and end the suffering of both Palestinians and Israelis.
Well, Simone, so good to be with you today. Thank you so much for your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you.